Okay, we finally made it up to Halion Sonic SE, which is the flagship sample-based VST plugin for Cubase. And ironically, this one needs the least amount of instruction because it's the most well laid out, it's the most current user interface, and it's got the best support. But having said that, there are a handful of things that I want to share with you so you can get going quickly on this and make music effectively. The first is it has two fundamentally different views. This is the player view, which saves screen space, and you can click that and open it up to the editor view. And at the moment, I've got this one loaded with just a simple piano sound. And this is the easiest way to use Halion Sonic. But if you open this thing up and take a look, you can see there's room for up to 16 sounds in one version of Halion Sonic SE. And so you can use that in really two different ways. And the first one I'll call one to many. And let me open up the racks and show you what I mean by that. So I have in this project two versions of Halion Sonic SE. One is a track instrument, so that one instrument track feeds one instance of Halion. And then we have the rack instrument down below called many to one. And you'll see we have many MIDI tracks all driving one instance of Halion. And we'll come back to those in just a second. You can also use one track to drive many sounds within Halion Sonic. And for this example, I have three sounds loaded into the rack: the piano, an acoustic bass, and a brass sound. And I've done a pretty typical job of splitting this. Then the second tab over is your MIDI tab. And you can see that each one of these sounds has been set to MIDI channel 1, so that as I play from one keyboard, that data is going to feed all three sounds simultaneously. But how we've separated them is, first of all, by key value. So by clicking and dragging in the low key, you can see I've set the piano sound to trigger from middle C up. And not surprisingly, the bass sound picks up at middle C and plays to the lower half of the keyboard. So just an absolutely classic keyboard split. Then the brass sound, you can see, is active across the entire keyboard. But what I've done is come over to this sub-tab for velocity. And I've told the brass sound that it's only going to trigger at extremely high velocities. So now I'll embarrass myself by trying to demonstrate this a little bit. What we have here is one track instrument, or excuse me, one rack instrument. I'll open its editor. And again, you can see a drum loop. We have a synth bass. We have a keys sound and a pad sound. But this time, if we go to the MIDI channels, you'll see that they've each been assigned their own discrete MIDI channel. And then you can see we've made some adjustments in the mixer and the effects tab here. The mix tab, and you should be able to see we've got activity on all four channels independently here. Okay, so this is a case where we have many MIDI tracks feeding one instance of Halion. And there are a couple of different reasons that you might want to do that. The primary one is probably to save processor power. You have the ability to send the output from Halion Sonic to the mix console in discrete channels. So you're not forced to do your mix down within Halion Sonic, although you can. You have the option to take all 16 of these voices, assuming it was fully loaded, and send each one to a different channel within the mix console, so that from a mix down standpoint, from a post-production standpoint, you can use all your usual tools. It looks and feels like a normal session. You're just only using one of these monster synths instead of 8 or 9 or 16 or however many you have. Okay, three last things about Halion Sonic SE that I want to share with you. The first is, if you click on the Options tab and look to the lower right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a button for key commands. And you actually have the ability to set up an entire system of key commands specifically for use within Halion Sonic SE. And they will speed things up as much as any shortcut key in any program ever does. So you can assign. And a lot of folks will click and right-click over here trying to, how do I call up a different library? I want to explore the artist series. And this is just an icon. You can't, it's not interactive at all. The only way to access the different libraries is to open some version of Media Bay. And of course, you can do that from the preset select window. and you'll see that there are, you've got a lot of different Halion Sonic libraries you can call up there. The other option is to come into Media Bay and open Instruments and then Halion Sonic SE, and it'll display all of the sound libraries there in discrete boxes. So if we take the factory selection and come down and find a preset that you like, not only is that an easier way to find it, you can also click and drag that directly into the slot that you want. And that can make not only finding but loading the plugin a lot quicker. Third and final thing that I want to share with you here is a really cool innovation that they introduced in version, I think 7.5 or version 8, and that is this trip library. A trip is actually, it's not even a library, it's a synthesizer module that they plugged into Halion Sonic. And let me show you what I did there again. I'm going to select the instruments, the Halion Sonic SE plugin, and then the trip library. Grab one of these sounds and plug it in. And when you do, the edit menu becomes a 3-oscillator subtractive synthesizer. And you have filters, and you have waveform types, and ring modulators, and noise, and all of there's a full mod matrix, and even an arpeggiator in here. And suddenly, Halion Sonic goes from being a simple, although powerful, sample playback device to a subtractive synthesizer. That can be just a ton of fun and something you should definitely explore as you're messing around with this one. So we will leave Halion Sonic SE here and finish up with Groove Agent SE. Okay, the last plugin we're going to look at is Groove Agent SE. And again, you could do an entire video just on this plugin, and we have, and you should check that out at the Streamworks store. But to get you going quickly, we'll go over some of the basics here. The first thing you have to do is load this with both sounds and patterns, and the easiest way is to right-click over the first agent slot and select the option to load kit with patterns, and then this is going to ensure that you get the sounds and the patterns that map to each other well. The second thing is to recognize you've got two fundamental modes: a pattern mode and then an instrument mode. And the instrument mode is by far the coolest looking visually. You can click on the pictures, or you can click on the pads, which are velocity sensitive here. And you've got all kinds of abilities to move microphones around and adjust the individual sounds of the drums and so forth. And then any of these banks that have the orange light on above them have content of some sort in there. And if you switch to and you've got a mixer like we just saw in Halion Sonic SE, and then an options pane for other sorts of plugin setup. But if we come back to the pattern mode, now those same bank of pads change, and each one triggers, instead of a sound, one of the drum patterns like this. Now you can trigger Groove Agent SE a couple of different ways to demonstrate some of the functions. I'm going to use this internal play button. And what I want to show is the XY pad here. This is fairly innovative. If you move this slider to the right, the complexity value goes up, and it's going to throw in more notes. And you move it towards the simple side, and it's going to strip it down. And then you have an intensity control as well. Works like this. And that's can be fully automated, and it's basing its changes there on whatever style you have selected in the style chooser here. So in terms of getting Groove Agent SE to function and go with your project, it's not dissimilar from Loop Mesh. You have essentially two ways. One, you can take a pattern that you like and drag it to your instrument track, and it's going to convert it into MIDI notes. And then you have the option to we could use our edit in place here and adjust the velocity and all the other MIDI manipulation tools that you've got there. Okay, the other way that you can make this work with your project is to record trigger notes like we did with Loop Mesh. So this pad here, break 1 is C0. Okay, and the groove 1 down here is A-1. So I'm going to just start recording and use the trigger notes to fire those off. Okay, so that's the other process if you don't want to drag the individual notes in. The advantage to doing this is that you retain the ability to use that XY slider and any of the onboard pattern manipulation tools. Once you take a pattern here and you drag it out, and it becomes this block of MIDI notes up there. It's sort of removed from the brains of Groove Agent at that point. So you've created the individual notes, but the only way to manipulate them now is to go in and manually move them around. You can't use the onboard tools in Groove Agent there. So that should be enough to get you going. Like I said, we have an entire video on Groove Agent that'll take you through step by step and block by block how to edit it. Okay, so before we wrap up the VST plugins here completely, I want to show you just a couple of cool things you can do with some of the things we've looked at. So we're going to go back to, of all things, Loop Mash, and we get an empty instance of that going here. And one of the things you can do that's kind of cool with this is to take a piece of audio and drag it right into Loop Mash. And you can do that right out of Media Bay. You can take something over here. And let me find yeah, there we go. That would work. You can drag something right out of Media Bay into a Loop Mash track, and it'll slice it up. Okay, you can also take something from your project, and I've opened another one of the Alan Morgan projects here. Sounds like this. So if we took this refrain here, this guitar lick, and we drag that in, it'll also slice that up for us. You can do some neat remix effects with a song that way. And then to bring this full circle, if you take our drum synth here, Groove Agent, we open that back up. You could take those individual slices from Loop Mash and drag them right onto the different pads. And this is going to create essentially what would be like a launchpad tool, like the Yamaha Tenorion, I think, does that. Or there's a bunch of Novation stuff where you take snippets of your song and you add it to the different launchpad tools, and then you can. Okay, that's maybe not the best example, but this gives you the ability. Then you could map those pads to your live keyboard or your drum setup so that you can come in here and introduce kind of a remix thing, and you could fire off individual samples of all that on top of the original version of the song too. So if you're trying to do the remix thing, there's some very easy ways to play around with that in a hurry. And along those same lines, there is a light version of Loop Mash called Loop Mash FX, which this you can drop in as an effect on any channel, and this gives you all of those DJ tools, but instead of applying them to a field of slices, it's applying them to whatever's coming through that channel. In this case, it's the entire stereo mix for that song, and this is one of the ways you can do some of the tape stop effects and things that are popular in some stuff today. So it would be something like this. Okay, so you get the idea. That can be fun too, again, if you're trying to do the remix thing. Okay, the last thing I want to share with you is a trick to automate parameters that weren't intended to have automation applied to them. Normally, when you right-click on any given parameter, it'll call up the option to automate it. And there are some things, like, for example, the grid resolution here in this Loop Mash FX plugin, that there's no way to directly connect it to an automation lane. And I've plugged it into the bass mic channel here just as a demonstration. If we engage the read-write automation here and change that around, you can see there's nothing being written. What you can do, however, is open the Quick Controls tab, press Learn, and then select the item. And now you can see the grid size parameter came up, disable Learn. Then you can see that it did, in fact, capture the grid size changes there because we had it mapped to the quick control. The grid itself can't be automated, but it can be linked to a quick control, and the quick control can be automated. So it won't work 100% of the time, but in a surprising number of cases, you can reach in with the automation around the back and get at it by connecting whatever it is to a quick control and then automating the quick control. So with that in mind, we will leave the world of VST and move on with the rest of the show.